Yo and hello and welcome back to another episode of the League of Fantasy Legends podcast. I am your host, Chris Benedict, aka Pistons Wish. We are here for our Rankings Revealed episode. We're going to go over our rankings for the 2023 split now that all the rosters have come through. Once again, joining me is FairstBiscut. Biscuit, how are you, man?
Doing fantastic. We got a lot to talk about, so I'm looking forward to getting into it.
We sure do. I'm so excited for the season to finally be here. Feels like it's been a long break since the end of Worlds. But nonetheless, let's get into it. First, I want to talk about the Ego app. Of course, it's a fantasy esports competition app. And so if you haven't seen it, check it out. They're going to be doing some fantasy contests. It's going to be mostly for the LEC. And so, that is what it is. But hopefully we can get them to do LCS one day. Also want to bring up our Discord and Twitter. Twitter is at LFL Pod. The Discord is the League of Fantasy Legends Discord. You can find that in the description of this episode or in the podcast. But let's get into it. But before we get into rankings, I want to talk about the big news that came out last week. We're a little bit behind on it. Obviously, we didn't record an episode last week, but we finally got official times for when the LCS will be playing. It'll be Thursday and Friday afternoons for us in the Eastern time zone at 3 p.m. on Thursday and Friday. It's actually at noon in LA where they actually play the games. And, there's been some pushback. It seems like the fans aren't really about it. I know personally for me, I don't love it. Do you have any thoughts on that, Biscuit?
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot to unpack here, but just to, get the story out in a nutshell, as you mentioned, they are coming out with new days, and I think the biggest thing that made people upset were the times, right? Because if you're in, in America, you're obviously watching LCS Prime as your primary league, I would assume. So the times really don't work for people who are used to, especially seeing it on the weekends, right? Because before they had it in, it was like the afternoon to evening, and now it's going to be like midday to ending in the evening. So the times are the biggest problem here. Before I bring out my pitchfork from my West Coast brethren, I did a little bit of research, and it almost seems like, from what I understand, they didn't throw all the cards out there as to why they did the things they did, which also made people really upset because, as far as I understand, there wasn't really a description or reasoning really behind why they did it outside of, oh, hey, we have statistics that say it would be good to run the games at this time. So as far as I understand, I think one of the biggest reasons they made the change was because they thought that this was going to be times where they could not only have the people from America, whether it be Canada, Mexico, all of North America, I should say, watching LCS, but it also gives more of an opportunity for the European fans if they're, I'm sure there are some, obviously, but more of an opportunity for the European fans to watch, instead of staying up till 3, 4, 5 in the morning, whatever the time difference is over there, to watch this league as well. So I think it's also valid to bring up, and again, I don't want to get too far into it, but they also mentioned not only the League of Legends scheduling, but their newest esport, Valorant, which now has slots on the weekend for at least NA. I don't know exactly what other leagues or regions are going to be participating, but a lot of people are upset because they think that Valorant is taking the LCS slot, which I don't necessarily. I mean, yes, it is a valid point, but I don't think it's that big of a deal on the main issues. I would say I think it's more of the date change, which it was rumored happening, and then the times, especially, I feel like hit everybody, blindsided them per se. So, I mean, did you have any additional feedback or maybe any other feelings of how you thought about it?
Yeah, I was actually excited for the change to weekdays because, as I get up there in age, I've got a kid. Saturdays and Sundays were tough. Like, we've got stuff to do. And so, weekdays, I thought I was going to be able to watch more, but with it being at 3 o'clock, I usually work until about 7. And so I'm going to miss almost all of them unless I can pull them up at work, which I may be able to do, but certainly won't be as engaged as I would have been otherwise. So, a little bit bummed about the timing of it, but obviously I'm still going to watch as much as I can. Are you going to be able to watch it live with these times?
Yeah, so it doesn't affect me really at all. I mean, outside of just having meetings at work, if anything were to come up, but I primarily work from home, so I should be able to at least have it on in the background, seeing what's going on. So I guess for people who work from home, it obviously helps them if they're able to watch it during work or, again, at least have it on in the background. But like you mentioned, if you're not getting home till 7 o'clock, I would assume you're going to miss at least 3, if not 4 of the matches on any given day.
I know. I tell you, my wife is probably going to be happy about it because I won't be sitting on the couch on Saturday afternoons. But it is what it is. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. Another thing that I saw mentioned is, they used to do the Monday Night League, if you remember. They played games on Monday night, tried to make it hyped up like Monday Night Football, and nobody ended up really watching. Now, that being said, it was at 8 p.m. on a Monday, probably literally competing with Monday Night Football. So, it is what it is. I don't agree with the decision, but we'll see how it goes. A lot of people have spoken out, and so hopefully the LCS at least knows that people are unhappy, and if they decide to make a change, then they can do that. And if they decide not to, well, I guess that's their prerogative too.
Yeah, it will definitely be interesting in seeing how it plays out. And I think you mentioned hit it on the head as far as making any kind of in-season changes. I'm not sure if they would do that, but you got to hope that that's something they're willing to do if they're not seeing the results they're looking for. Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how the viewership numbers, respond. But I think they'll go down a little bit, but we'll see. All right, well, let's get into it. We have our rankings. We put a lot of time into these. We did them totally independent of each other and then kind of compared them afterwards. And so you'll see some pretty big discrepancies between ours, but still exciting to finally get these out here. I tried to combine mine with the Sleeper app. Did you look at the Sleeper app yet as far as like the rankings they have on there?
So I just looked at it just the other night just to see, when we can maybe start looking at some stuff for the upcoming split. It doesn't look like they have too much on there outside of whatever ranking system that they have internally being all over the place. As far as I know, they have XU going number 1. Not sure how that's going to work out for them considering he's not in the league anymore. But, maybe they still have some kinks to work out on their end as far as that goes.
Yeah, XU number 1 and Double Lift number 80. There's only 50 players. So, hey, we'll see. Those are clearly not ready to go. Ours are. And so we're going to post these. It'll be on our Discord. We'll make it a separate channel. We'll put these in there. You can look at them and kind of compare them and see how they compare with what your expectations are. Love to hear from you guys about, what you think. Are my rankings stupid? Are Biscuit's rankings stupid?
More than likely.
Yeah, one of ours are for sure. And it's not me. So I got to know, who do you have, if you're in the number 1 spot, who is your number 1 player for this split?
So my number 1 player overall for this split would be Jojo Peon coming into it. I personally
okay.
Yeah, I personally prioritize mids and ADCs as my first 2 picks. Obviously depending on what's there, come your next pick. But with the number 1 pick overall, I'm taking a known commodity. He had a massive year last year. Obviously, there's some new pieces that are going to be, or are, I should say, not going to be, but are a part of the team, right, for this upcoming split. So we'll see how they incorporate. I think one could argue that they have a better team than they did last split. So I'm really interested to see him not only, at least try to maintain again with the new pieces, but maybe even hit an even higher level than he hit last split. So I think Jojo Peon overall absolutely should be going in the first round, if not first overall.
Yeah, I think that's a decent pick. I don't totally agree with it, mostly just because I think, every time we've seen 80 carries have scored the highest, but JoJo's so safe. He's going to be good. I went similarly, same team. I went with FBI, and funnily enough, this is the third split that we've done preseason rankings, and it's the third time I've chosen FBI as my top overall player. Granted, totally different this time because he's on a new team. Obviously, FBI moving over to Evil Geniuses from 100 Thieves. When I was looking at last year's stats, so Danny was obviously the highest scoring player last split in the summer. He actually had a 4-point gap between him and second place, which was FBI. You look at the mid lane, Jojo Peon, only 1.5 points per game over Bjergsen. Bjergsen was second. And so I think, Evil Geniuses, they like to play around not Jojo. Like, Jojo is willing to sacrifice some in the mid lane and make plays happen elsewhere on the map. And so for that reason, I went with FBI, partly because Jojo is going to support him, and I think EG is going to be the best team this year. So I went with FBI. Did you have any other players you're considering in that spot?
As far as like number 1 overall?
Yeah, like who was your other choices?
Yeah, absolutely. So
or maybe who do you have number 2, I guess is a similar question.
Okay, yeah. So just to follow up on the FBI there to close that out, I had an FBI as my 3rd overall for a lot of the decisions that you had mentioned already. But I primarily had him behind the player I had number 2, which I'll get to shortly here, just because, again, he is going to be on a new team. So we don't know exactly how they're going to incorporate him. I think a lot of the things you said are obviously true. And you would think to an extent they're going to try to keep some of the same formula. Obviously, they're having all new coaching staff, so maybe it'll change a little bit. But I do foresee FBI scoring pretty big, depending on how many teams are in your league. Definitely considered in the first round for sure, or even number 1 if you're a big Evil Geniuses fan or just an FBI fan in general. But for my number 2 player, and I said this at the end of last split, just because of the way he not only dominated through the last half of last split, but into the playoffs as well, I have Berserker at number 2, so he would be my number 1 AD carry. He's on the same team. They're bringing back 4 of the 5 members that they had. He's got the same support, which I always think is important. And I just think he's going to continue to tear it up and hopefully hit all new levels, come this split. So will FBI finish ahead of him or vice versa? I think it's really a toss-up, but I'm more confident. And I think as you'll see, we go through the rankings, I like the players who are known commodities. Not that FBI isn't, but again, new team, you never know how that could work out. And I just like the players who, they've proven themselves on the same team, right? So I have Berserker number 2, just slightly ahead of FBI in this case.
Yeah, Berserker, let me look at where I have him. It's high. Yeah, I have him at 3. And so obviously we are very similar there. Berserker, I think the only question with him is how good is C9's going to be? And we saw at the end of last split that they can be really good. I think if the meta is AD carry centric, then I think C9 is going to do great. Obviously, Diplex in the mid lane is kind of a toss up, but they play around Berserker, and that's when they're the most successful. That's what we found out. Obviously, the Sivir Zeri meta as we got into the playoffs, and they just put all their eggs in the Berserker basket, and he carried them home. And so, if they are smart enough to realize that's their win condition, then I think he has a great chance to finish number 1 overall for sure. I've got him at 3. Why don't we just go across each position, see who we have number 1. We'll start with the top lane. I've got Someday. Obviously, Someday moving from 100 Thieves to Evil Geniuses along with FBI. I think EG is going to finish at the top. Someday was really the only person who challenged Impact last year as far as top scoring top laners. He had a couple games that were just straight hard carry games. And so I've got Someday number 1. Who do you got number 1 here for the top laners?
So I also have Someday, and I think that just goes back to what I had mentioned previously, definitely adding all the points that you had already mentioned. But I think this Evil Geniuses team is arguably better than it was last split. I do think Someday is better than Impact. So I have him number 1 as well. I don't think it's really a question on my end.
Yeah, I agree. It all comes down, like, if Evil Geniuses is as good as they were last year, and we see no reason why they wouldn't be, then they're going to finish up top. And so with that being said, is there any chance Inspired is not the number 1 jungler for you?
I'm sorry, are we jumping to jungle, or are we going through the rest
jungle, yeah.
Oh, excuse me. Okay, so for jungle, let me just pull up here quick. No, you're all right. I do have Inspired number 1 again. Basically all the points I already mentioned as far as the same cohesiveness throughout the team. I don't see any reason why Inspired isn't going to be number 1 at the end of the split. And if not, he'll definitely be near the top. I think he's a very safe pick in the jungle, probably pretty early in the first couple of rounds.
Yeah, so sorry, I'm going to make you pull it all over the place. Where do you have Inspired overall?
So for overall, I actually have him at number 5 overall between all positions. Just because if you take a look at some of the numbers from even last split, I believe he was quite a ways away from the next jungler in terms of
6 points per game.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't see any reason why he wouldn't put up maybe not the same numbers, but I would think close to it. And then with all the unknowns from some of the other players coming in from other leagues and just now on other teams, I should say, we don't know how they're gonna perform. But especially compared to like Inspired, right? Like you would think Inspired is gonna just dominate in the jungle, at least early on, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking at these stats from last year. So on average, mid laners were the second highest scoring position. 24.4 points per game. Obviously, that's every mid laner's scores. AD carry first at 25.3. Jungler's third at 22.9. And yet, even with those stats, Inspired was the second highest scoring player. And so he was so dominant last year. I also have him at 5. So we are in step there. I mean, he's just going to be good. There's really not much more to say there, I don't think. We already talked about, you've got Jojo Pyun as your number 1 mid laner. I actually have Bjergsen here. I think that Bjergsen, first of all, he's probably the safest pick in the draft. Like, Bjergsen has never been bad. And not only that, but when I look at, I already mentioned it when we talked about Jojo, but Bjergsen on a worse team was just a couple points a game behind Jojo. I'm not sure how much worse 100 Thieves is going to be than Evil Geniuses. Obviously, 100 Thieves has a lot more up in the air with, Doublelift coming out of retirement, and you got the 2 academy players coming up, Tenacity, Busio. But I just really believe in Bjergsen. I think he's going to be the top scoring mid laner. You think I'm crazy for that one, or you think that could happen?
Not at all. I have him number 2 as far as mid laners go. I actually have him at number 4 overall. Just basically all the reasons you already said. He's very, very safe. I think he's definitely going to lead 100 Thieves if they're going to live and die right on Bjergsen at the end of the day. I think I don't want to say he hard carries the entire team, right? Because obviously we have, players, they have known players on the team. We just have no idea how they're going to mesh, right? But I feel like he's at the core of everything they're going to do, and if they succeed. So, I totally agree. He's definitely a safe pick.
And I also have Bjergsen at 4 overall, so we are lockstep there as well. 80 carries we've already talked about. I've got FBI, you've got Berserker. Support, it's Vulcan, right? Like, it has to be Vulcan.
Yeah, I mean, the best support coming back on the best team, who, again, arguably better than it was last split. It's Vulcan easily.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so who's your bust? Like, who do you think everyone's real high on and you're just not there?
So I'm going to give kind of a, I don't want to say cop-out answer, because I do feel like there is a lot of relevance to it, and I don't want to go too far in the weeds because we're going to have other episodes where we're going to talk about this kind of thing. But for this upcoming split, especially the spring split, right? Not obviously there's 2 splits a year, right? But especially focusing again for this particular reason on the spring split, you got to consider in fantasy, any sport you play, right? There's always an amount of luck, right? So especially with this upcoming split, you want to take the players on the teams that you think are good, but there are so many new players and essentially so many new teams, right? Because the roster shuffled around so much that you really just don't know who's going to be good. So if that's ever the case, I just say swing for the fences and hope for the best. So I'm going to say for biggest bust, potentially, it could be a player from either FlyQuest or Liquid, because I think those 2 teams.
Okay.
Yeah, I just think for those 2 teams, we have no idea what to expect from them, especially in spring split as they start working together and start playing in real games. No one has any idea what to expect when compared to Cloud9, who has most of the roster back, Evil Geniuses, who just seen what they retooled. But I think if I'm gonna have to go out on a limb and say a bust from one of those teams, I think it's going to be, I don't know, maybe like Impact doesn't work out, or Prince perhaps. Just somebody from one of those teams I feel like is going to get drafted really high. And they rightfully could, right? They should and probably could be one of the best players, but at the same time, maybe they don't work out so hot, at least in the spring split. So that's kind of where I'm coming out of when looking at those 2 teams and drafting them. I just say swing for the fences and hope for the best, and hopefully do well picking other players at other positions if you do end up picking a player from one of those 2 teams.
Yeah, FlyQuest and Team Liquid, we talked about it in our last episode. They are the wild cards. I think either of those 2 teams could win the split. I think they could finish towards the bottom. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with those teams? You got players coming in from the LCK, and how is everybody going to mesh? It'll be really exciting to see. I debated saying Jojo Pyun is a bust. Not that I think he's not going to be good, because obviously he will be, but I think he's just so committed to helping his team and sacrificing resources that I don't think there's any chance he's not a top 3 mid laner. But I just, if you're, obviously you've got him 1 overall, I just don't believe that he's going to have a 1 overall type season, even though I think he will be top 10. But I'm not saying it. I'm not going with it. It's not Jojo Pyun, but I think you're going to hate this one just as much. I'm going Jensen. It's a little hard to say because we haven't really seen rankings. Like, I'm not sure how highly people are rating Jensen right now. But I think Dignitas, like when I'm putting together power rankings, like obviously they did some good stuff. Santorin, Arma, both good players. But I just don't really see them above, I think their ceiling is probably fifth. I think Jensen was the weak link of C9 last year, especially when we looked at Worlds and how much he got picked on and some of those control mages in the mid lane. And I don't think he's going to be that good this year.
Cutting me deep. I guess it only took 20 minutes into the podcast, but okay, well, I can bounce back from that. So, I mean, I think that's all legit what you said. I mean, I don't want to say like I'm a homer by any means because I'll tear apart my team any day of the week, but I mean, I had Jensen at 4th overall. I think, that's obviously one step above where you thought they might finish at
4th.
I'm sorry, 4th in mid. Oh,
4th in mid. Okay.
Yeah. So I had him at 4th in mid, and I have him in front of guys like, Harry, who has never played in the league. And again, that's a liquid player. They could easily finish in front of Jensen. I have him in front of Palafox just because I think he's just pound for pound better than Palafox. I know CLG is probably a better team than Dignitas, but I still think Jensen will, could potentially outscore him at the end. I have in front of like Vikla, who again a FlyQuest player. We don't know what to expect from them. So I mean, if you're going to take Harry or Vikla in front of Jensen, I don't think that's out of the question at all. I would agree in that case. But I'm going to go for the known commodity in Jensen. I know he's on a much weaker team, obviously, in Dig versus last year's Cloud9. But I just think that he's going to get those guaranteed points. And I wouldn't want to be sitting there with like a last pick and not having my mid laner. Obviously Jensen's there. I would take him as a safe pick instead of taking somebody like, Gory or Maple or even a Blaze Olive. So I think it go either way. If you want to play it safe, you'll take Jensen. If you want to swing for the fences, you'll take Vikla or Harry. I think it comes down to one of those two options, and obviously where you're picking these players in your draft.
Right, yeah. Obviously, I pick him above those three names you mentioned, Gory, Maple, Blaze Olive. I've got him at 7th. I've got him at 30th overall. I'm looking at your rankings. You got him at 9th. So I think that's our biggest discrepancy. I just don't know. He's definitely a boomer bust player. At least he was last split. Like, he had some really high scores last year, but he also had some really low ones. So we'll see. Do you have a sleeper, like a name you have circled that I must get this guy in my team?
I mean, as far as sleepers go, do I have like a player in particular? I don't at this point in time. I think if you're just listening to us and doing your research, I feel like. We're going to say, at least me personally, I'm going to say the sleepers are going to come from Liquid and FlyQuest, right? I know I kind of said that for like the bus, but, like I just mentioned with the case for mid, right? Like, who knows? Maybe if you give Vikla as the last pick on your team, the round out your team, he ends up being a top 5, if not higher, player in the mid, perhaps. So I think if you're going to pick a sleeper, again, I think it kind of comes, I feel like a lot of players in fantasy, right? They're going to take the known commodities like, Bjergsen, JoJo. All these players from Evil Geniuses, 100 Thieves, Cloud9 that they know. I mean, you always have like the player who, I like liquids. I'm going to take all the liquid players. But I feel like at the end of the day, you got to kind of see how your draft's going. But as far as like an in particular sleeper, I mean, maybe somebody like Prince or even Vikla, perhaps. I think one of those.
You can't name the same guy for sleeper and bust. You said Prince for bust. How dare you?
Well, it could go either way. There's just that much uncertainty, I feel like. But I mean, I'll bow out. I don't have a sleeper right now. I would have to do a little bit more research on my end.
Yeah, we still got a whole month, so we'll certainly come up with something. Mine is Summit, and again, like I'm not sure what the general perception is. It's still pretty early, but I've got Summit as a player circled that I want on my team. I'm looking at this Team Liquid roster. You've got Harry in the mid lane and Yeon in the 80 carry spot, both coming up from the academy system. And I compare those to Summit, who, last time we saw him in the spring on C9, he was 1v9 in games. You got Piosik and Core JJ. Core JJ is best when he's roaming the map and making plays everywhere else. And I think they're going to enable Summit to do what he does best, and that is play forward, dominate lanes, and win games by himself. And so I think that if Team Liquid is good, it will be through Summit. And so that's why I've got him circled. I've got him as my number 3 mid laner, and I've got Yeon as my number 6 AD carry. And so I'm really confident that they're going to play through Summit. So I'm excited to hopefully get him on my team. I've got him ranked the third top laner, number 16 overall. Looks like you've got him at 26. Do you have any thoughts on Summit?
So I think 16 is, I don't know. I'm just looking at our rankings here. They are quite a bit different when it comes to the top lane. I don't prioritize top maybe as much. As definitely not compared to like mid and 80 carry, and then kind of just take the best player from there. But I have Summit at, like you said, 26 overall. I do have him behind like Someday, Impact, Fudge. Again, those are all three well-known commodities. Obviously, he's coming back after playing overseas, brand new team. Could he make the leap? Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. I'm sure I'll get some hate for this, but I actually have Arma in front of Summit just slightly. I have, again, Arma.
Do you?
Yeah,
Wow.
I have Arma at 4, and then I have Arma at 24 as opposed to Summit at 26. I mean, hate me all you want, but Arma he was a top 3. I think he was top 3 in LEC last year. That's got to stand for something, right? I think he was in the top 5 when you combine both leagues, LCS and LEC at top. Again, it is dignitized, but I don't know. I think it's a legitimate case to put him in front of a Summit. So, I think that's a really good sleeper pick, I feel like. So I wouldn't be surprised. Again, we hammered it home so many times now, but those Liquid and FlyQuest players, at least for me, they could be boom or bust, I feel like. So I think that's a good pick.
Yeah, I can't wait to see what the consensus kind of becomes as we get closer to the season. We'll see some more people put rankings out. I think some people might go really high on Team Liquid or FlyQuest. We might see some people put Prince 1 overall. I don't see it, but I could see some people doing that. I want to talk about a couple other players that we have just pretty different. I'm looking at the mid lane at Diplex. Looks like you've got him at 6 overall. I have him down at 18. Do you want to talk about what you think about Diplex?
Yeah, so I mean, Diplex is just, as far as I understand, in my opinion, he's going to be just that missing puzzle piece in the puzzle that's already Cloud9, right? I mean, you're running back the entire roster. I mean, I'd like to hear your take on it, but if you thought Jensen was the weak link on this team last split, do you think Diplex is a better fit? I mean, I probably don't know too much, and that's understandable, but maybe you think Diplex is better than Jensen, or has the opportunity to be. I just think, again, I value mid lane for sure, so I have him at 6 overall. He's coming back on the team that won the split last season. They're bringing back the entire team, obviously outside of Diplex, and they had a lot of boom weeks. I know you said boom or bust for Jensen, so hopefully it's a little bit more consistent for Diplex, but I think he has opportunity to just continuously score big weeks, week after week. And I feel like he could be that that missing piece, and maybe an upgrade over Jensen. So what is your kind of thoughts on, not only Diplex in general, but maybe Diplex versus Jensen?
Yeah, so I actually have him as my number 3 mid laner. I just have him lower in the overall rankings. I just think he's going to be like a full tier below what Bjergsen and JoJo are. And we talked about earlier, I think that C9 is going to play so hard around Berserker, or at least I think they should, that he might just drop down a little bit. And so, it's not that I don't believe him. I think he'll be fine. I don't know what to think between him and Jensen. Obviously, Jensen's one of the best players of all time in the LCS. Diplex only just now showing up. But I've just got him lower in the overall rankings. I just think I'd rather have the top tier in the jungle, the top tier in the top lane before I drop down to the second tier of mid lanes. I think that's what it really comes down to.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I definitely agree with him being a step below, both JoJo and Bjerg.
Yeah. And the next player I want to talk about, and this one probably going to be less of a discussion of the player and more of a discussion about the value of the position as a whole. But you've got Vulcan as your number 12 overall player. I've got him at 21. And my ranking of him has nothing to do with who he is as a player and more to do with the fact that he's a support, I guess. I want to look at these rankings from last year and see, just scoring-wise, how he compared to some of the other players. Yeah, I guess he was really high. What are your thoughts on Vulcan and picking supports early?
So, again, I think you kind of touched on it already. Like, it definitely depends on, what round you're in, who's there, a whole bunch of different factors, right? But, I mean, he was, from the numbers I'm looking at, let me just double check here. He was definitely top 10 in scoring last split, right? or I'm sorry, it looks like he was 12. So he was like ahead of guys like Someday, Blabber, like Santorin, like some of these players he, scored ahead of. And it was because he was on that team, that Evil Geniuses team, that was just dominant. We did mention that it was historic numbers in terms of highs for that Evil Geniuses team. The last split, again, I feel like they have the opportunity to get roughly around there. I don't see them taking a big step off, if at all. And I think they could potentially be even better than they were last split, if that is even possible. So that's why I have Vulcan as high as I do. We already touched on him being by far the number one support. I think or at least, from our opinion, as far as overall rankings. And I just feel like he's a really safe pick because he is on that team and in that same system. I mean, again, I think when it comes to support, it really comes down to like when you're picking them. But when it comes to Vulcan,
for sure,
I don't see why you wouldn't take Vulcan in maybe even the second round if you're like at the end of the second round, perhaps. But I think it really depends on what's there.
So I'm looking at it. So if you've got him ranked 12, so that means you'd pick him about the middle of the second round. And I think that's just a bit too early for me. Although, as we look back at... So when we did our episode previewing the summer split, I don't remember if you were with me for that one. I compared picking an early support to like picking Travis Kelce in fantasy football, right? Like a position that in general doesn't score as high, but he's kind of an outlier. Granted, when I was talking about that, I was talking about Core JJ, and that one did not really work out in the summer. But Vulcan kind of could be that player. So maybe you're talking me into it a little bit, I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way I look at it would be like, hey, I prioritize, mids and 80 carries. So if, let's say, 5-team league, let's say you have like at least 4 from each of those positions already gone. I mean, you're looking at, you can either take middle of the pack, which could be a toss-up, or you can take the number one player at their position. Come back to you. That's the way I kind of think of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just kind of a philosophy thing too. So I like it. All right, last play I've got on this list is we are kind of getting a little bit long here. Impact. So you got Impact at 10. I've got him at 24. And so obviously Impact moving away from Evil Geniuses on FlyQuest. We've already talked about FlyQuest a lot, about how up and down they could be, but 10's pretty high. What do you have some defense there?
Yeah, so I have him at 10th. I have him at number 2 as far as tops go. Again,
number 2.
Yeah, I have him at number 2. Just because, again, there's that boomer bust potential. I don't want to touch on that anymore. But he was the number 2 top last split. So, I mean, there is at least some kind of consistency there you would think, at least with his performance. I mean, I think, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know how to compare this year's FlyQuest team to last year's Evil Geniuses team. I don't, it's not as good, at least I don't think of right now. But I don't see it being like leaps and bounds less than what Evil Geniuses was last split. So with that said, I mean, I feel like there is some kind of consistency factor there. He's been in the league for quite some time, so he obviously knows what he's doing. So I have him again at 10 as the number 2 top. I think that's an okay spot for him right now.
Yeah, I've got him at the number 5 top. So I think that's where the big difference comes in. One is that I'm not really prioritizing top. I do have my top couple top laners higher, but I've kind of got Impact in that second tier of top laners. So that's where the big difference comes. 14-point difference. That's our second biggest. Jensen was the only bigger one. So yeah, I think these rankings are super fun to go through. I'll be excited to see, how other people, react and how other people's rankings are and how out there ours might be. But yeah, thanks for doing this with me, getting the rankings out. Do you have anything else you wanna touch on these rankings before we close up?
Yeah, I probably should have mentioned this in the very beginning, but my kind of philosophy, and we kind of touched on it like with the Vulcan type situation. My philosophy is like, I do prioritize the higher scoring players, obviously like 80 carries and mids, but then I kind of look at like, hey, and this isn't the same case with Impact as it was at Vulcan. It's like, hey, if I'm going to be looking at like the 5th or 6th best mid or 80 carry, maybe I should look at top and see what's there, which is why I think I have him higher, because by no means is he like scoring higher than some of the players I rank like less than him or under him, I should say. Right. But at the same time, it's like you got to take a top at some point, right? So I think that's kind of what factored into a lot of my rankings just overall. outside of that, and I definitely want to just try to hit it a little bit. Maybe we can save it for next episode, but we haven't touched on Double Lift, who we really don't know where they're gonna. We might have mentioned them during this episode, but I feel like that's a huge, what if, where does he go type thing as far as your draft goes. Did you want to maybe save that for next episode or touch on it now?
No way. I've got it on the outline. I just skipped it. I don't know what happened. Double Lift. I have him at 2 overall. You've got him at 11. That's kind of another big difference. I believe every time Double Lift has been in the league, he's dominated. And obviously it's been 2 years, but I don't see how that changes. I think he's on a good team. Put him with Bjergsen, put him with Closer, and then 2 of the top academy players in Tenassi and Busio. I believe in Double Lift. I got him at number 2 overall. And so I think he's going to be great.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to make of it. I know of the stories. I mean, I know of Double Lift, obviously. Like, I know what he means to the league and, how dominant he was. I don't know if it's maybe just a new version of the league. And, I don't know what his mindset is really, right? But, I mean, it definitely helps having Bjerg play with him. He has 2 rookies coming in. Is it going to be kind of that, like, yo, rookie, you do what I say type thing? Or how is he going to mesh with that team? Again, I'm not, nothing against Double Lift. I just don't know enough of his personality and about him, right? But obviously I know of him. So, I mean, I do have him at 11 overall. I think that's arguably even a bigger unknown, even outside of like FlyQuest and Liquid that we already touched on. But, I mean, 2 overall, that is like, I don't know. If you want to talk about boomer bust, that seems like the ultimate like statement to make, at least for this podcast, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, the way I look at it is he's the AD carry on the team I have to finish second in the league. And so if, obviously for them to finish second in the league, he's going to have to perform. And I think he can. I think he's, he's got the motivation. He's always kind of been that guy in this league. So, I mean, we'll see. It's definitely a huge unknown. I mean, 2 years off is a long time.
Right.
So thanks guys for listening in and joining us. Our next episode, we're going to talk about some drafting strategies, just fantasy strategies in general. And then I think we're going to run through a mock draft, try to get some things going. So excited for this split. It's got to be, tell me if you disagree, the most potential teams winning at the most unknowns that we've ever had.
Oh no, I completely agree. I feel like in addition to that, this is like the most parity we've, at least from when I've been watching, this is by far the most parity I've ever seen in the league. I mean, yeah, there's probably like some favorites, but I feel like there's going to be a lot of teams that are going to shock people, whether that be good or bad.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's 5.5 teams that could win this split. I gave CLG half of a chance. And I think the other 5 teams all have a chance of winning. I think that's about 3 more teams than we usually have. So,
agreed. Super
excited for this split. Thank you again for joining us, for listening. Thank you, Biscuit, for putting up together these rankings, talking it over with me. Check out the LFL Pod Discord. That will be in the description of this episode. Also on our Twitter accounts at LFL Pod. All of our rankings will be posted there. We also talk about fantasy LCS stuff year round, always having discussions. It's a good time. So join us there. Thank you so much for listening. This is Piston Swish and FairstBiscut signing off. Peace out.